Hello, greetings, and good day. So for this online lecture, we will be studying plant movement or plant trophism and NASTIC plant movements. Now we know that just like animals, plants can also respond to environmental stimuli such as light, gravity, and touch. Now this is possible because plants, they have sensors that can detect the direction of stimuli and also signal elongating organs in order to orient their growth towards or away from the stimuli. So we will start with our discussion of plant trophism or plant movement on phototrophism. Now we know for a fact that most people are familiar with the sight of houseplants bending towards the light from an open window. Now this is an everyday example of the phenomena known as phototrophism. Now phototrophism is defined as the response of plants to unilateral light. And the question is why is it that plants respond to light? Now this is possible because phototrophism orients the plant for optimal photosynthesis. Now phototrophism is very important to the plant. Now the impact of phototrophism is that it orients the growth and leaf angle towards incident light in order for the plant to maximize light interception needed for photosynthesis. Now what causes a plant to bend towards a light source? Now, the phototrophic response is attributed to a lateral redistribution of diffusible auxin, which is a plant hormone. Now, the role of auxin to phototrophism can be explained through the so-called Cholodny-Went hypothesis. Now, the Cholodny-Went hypothesis simply states that the unilateral illumination induces a lateral redistribution of auxin near the apex of the plant organ. This asymmetry in auxin distribution is maintained as the auxin is transported longitudinally towards the base of the plant organ. Now, the higher concentration of auxin on the shaded side of the plant organ stimulates those cells to elongate more than those on the lighted side of the plant organ. Now, it is this differential growth that causes the curvature of that plant organ towards the light source. Now, to help you visualize what the Cholodny-Went hypothesis means, let's take a look at this illustration. Now, because of the changing position or the changing direction of the light source, auxin is redistributed towards the shaded part of the plant shoot or the plant organ. And we know that auxin stimulate the cells to elongate. Now, this differential elongation of the cells on the shaded part of the plant shoot will allow that plant organ to bend towards the light. So one of the effects of auxin is to stimulate cell elongation like what I have mentioned a while ago. Now when light hits one side of the plant shoot or the plant organ, auxin is redistributed in the shaded part of the plant shoot. Now, this change in the concentration of auxin will stimulate the cells on the dark side or the shaded part of the plant shoot to lengthen or to elongate. And this will cause the shoot to bend away from the shaded side and towards the light source. So that is the explanation of Cholodny and Wendt in phototropism. So isn't that fascinating indeed? Alright, so everybody kindly take a look at this illustration explaining phototropism. Now again, because of the changing direction or position of the light source, auxin is transported or redistributed towards the shaded part of the plant shoot or the plant organ. Now we know that auxin stimulates the cells to elongate. Now because of the higher concentration of auxin on the shaded part of the plant shoot, this auxin will stimulate the cells of the shaded part of the plant to elongate. Now because of this differential elongation of cells, the plant shoot or the plant organ will bend towards the light. So that's how we explain phototropism. Alright, so everybody kindly take a look at this illustration explaining phototropism. Now again, because of the changing direction or position of the light source, auxin is transported or redistributed towards the shaded part of the plant shoot or the plant organ. Now we know that auxin stimulates the cells to elongate. Now because of the higher concentration of auxin on the shaded part of the plant shoot, this auxin will stimulate the cells of the shaded part of the plant to elongate. Now because of this differential elongation of cells, the plant shoot or the plant organ will bend towards the light. So that's how we explain phototropism. Now this bending of the plant shoot or the plant organ towards the light is vital because this bending of the plant shoot towards the light will optimize photosynthesis. And again, auxin plays an important role in this bending towards the light or phototropism. Now, since auxin is destroyed by light, auxin is redistributed or transported towards the shaded part of the plant shoot or the plant organ. So auxin accumulates on the shaded part or the darkened side of the plant, and this causes the cells of the shaded part of the plant to elongate. And again, this differential elongation will cause the plant shoot to bend towards the light. The higher auxin concentration on the shaded part of the plant causes more rapid growth on the shaded side, and this will result in the curving of the plant shoot towards the light. So isn't that fascinating indeed? Now one good example of a plant that is very obvious for phototropism is the sunflower. Now in sunflowers, there is a hormone inside the plant that is important for phototropism. And that hormone is called indole acetic acid or IAA. Now the function of IAA is to stimulate cell growth and enlargement wherever it is located. That's why if you will notice, the sunflower always follows the sun. Alright, and there are photoreceptors for phototropism. Now, one photoreceptor is phototrophin that responds to blue light, and we have neochrome that is regulated by red as well as blue light. Now at this point, let's watch this video about phototropism. Alright, so let's watch this.
Plants need to make their own food through photosynthesis. They're really good at maximizing the amount of light they take in. Their leaves are essentially just biological solar panels filled with light-absorbing biological machinery. Obviously, leaves that are directly facing the light are going to absorb more energy than leaves that are facing the wrong direction, and plants are pretty good at making sure their leaves are facing the right direction. We're talking about a certain type of tropism. Tropism comes from an old Greek word tropos, which means turning. When words start with photo, it means it's got something to do with the light. So phototropism is when plants turn or move in response to light. I'm going to show you what I mean with some bean sprouts. I prepped a small plastic tub with some cotton wool, then sprinkled some seeds on top. I added water and gave it a few days. Next, I took a cardboard box, cut out a section of the side for light to enter, and a hole in the front for the camera. Once the plants were established, I put them in the box, turned the lamp on to shine through the side, and put the camera in the front. I left them to do their thing for about 24 hours. All of the plants that had any light falling on them moved and grew towards the only source of light available to them, with the leaves receiving as much direct light as possible. This is happening because of auxins. Auxins are hormones, chemicals that send messages through a plant, and they're released from the tip and move down the stem. Auxins can make cells get longer, which means if auxins were applied equally to all cells, the plant would grow taller. But if light reaches a plant from one side, auxins will accumulate on the darker side. This means the cells on the darker side will grow longer than those on the bright side. Picture columns of cells side by side, and imagine only one side receives any sunlight. The cells on the darker side would accumulate auxins and grow longer, forcing the stack to bend to the side until the top of the stack is pointing toward the light. For plants, the effect of auxins causes the whole stem to bend in one direction, making the tip and the leaves face towards the light.
Auxins produced at the very tip of the shoot, and in shoots, auxin triggers cell growth. Light causes auxin to concentrate on the darker side of the shoot tip. Auxin now spreads down the shoot, so cells on the darker side grow faster than cells on the lighter side. This causes the shoot to grow towards the light.
Now that is really an interesting video about phototropism. Now, another type of plant movement or tropism is known as gravitropism, or the response of the plant towards gravity. Now, we know that gravitropism is probably one of the most unfailingly obvious and familiar plant phenomena to many people. Now, everyone is aware that shoots always grow up and roots always grow down. So that is the obvious observation of gravitropism among plants. Now, the primary root, which grows toward the center of the earth, is known as positive gravitropism, and the shoot, which grows away from the center of the earth, exhibits what we call negative gravitropism. Now, organs such as stolons in the case of fungi, rhizomes, and some lateral branches of plants which grow at right angles to the pull of gravity are said to be diagravitrophic. So again, in positive gravitrophism, the primary root goes towards the direction of the pull of gravity, while in negative gravitrophism, the plant shoot grows away in the direction of the pull of gravity. So that's negative gravitrophism. Now the question is, what are the advantages to the plant of positive and negative gravitrophic growth responses? So in order to ensure survival, the shoot with its photosynthetic structures like the leaves must be above ground in order to take advantage of the source of sunlight. And also the root system must remain in the soil in order to secure anchorage and a reliable supply of nutrients and water. So that is for positive gravitrophism, while in negative gravitrophism, the shoot with its photosynthetic structures must be above ground. So the shoot always grows away from the pull of gravity in order to take advantage of sunlight above ground. So those are the advantages of the plant of positive and negative gravitrophic growth responses. Now at this point, let us now study the successive phases of root gravitrophism. Now, the four successive phases of root gravitrophism involves the following. So we have perception, transduction, transmission, and growth response. So let us now zoom in on perception. Now, when we speak of perception, the root responds to the pull of gravity. So there are perception cells with starch grains. Now these starch grains will respond to gravity by falling against the inner and outer tangential wall of the columella cells in the root cap. So here is a photo of the root cap with the columella cells and starch grains. So the starch grain responds to gravity by moving towards the inner and outer tangential wall of these columella cells. Then this is followed by transduction. Now the biophysical signal of those falling starch grains is then converted into a biochemical signal through a second messenger such as hydrogen ions or calcium ions, and the relocation of auxin transport facilitators. Now, these second messengers such as hydrogen ions and calcium ions and the relocation of auxin transport facilitators will then transmit the signal to the elongation zone of the root via an altered flow of auxin. This will result in the curvature of the root towards the pull of gravity. So that's how the root responds to gravity or gravitrophism. Now, to help you visualize the four successive phases of root and shoot gravitrophism, let's watch this video about gravitrophism. Alright, so let's watch this.
Auxin is also responsible for much of a plant's sense of direction. Gravitropism, also known as geotropism, is growth in relation to gravity. The distribution of auxin within a plant's cells changes with the relationship between the direction of growth and gravity, helping the plant to grow correctly. Roots demonstrate positive geotropism, or growth towards the pull of gravity, while stems experience negative geotropism, growing away from the direction of gravitational pull. If you tip a potted plant on its side, and a few days later the stem has become bent and is growing straight up again, that's auxin at work.
Now, plant roots grow towards the force of gravity, and I'm showing you that here. This is called gravitropism or geotropism, and this also involves auxin. Auxin is produced in the root, but gravity causes the auxin to concentrate on the lower side. Now, the key fact is that in roots, auxin inhibits cell growth, so the lower side now grows more slowly than the upper side, and this causes the roots to grow towards the force of gravity.
Alright, so I hope you have learned a lot about gravitrophism through those videos. Now, at this point, let us now study nastic movement in plants. Now, when we speak of nastic movements in plants, this refers to plant movements in which the direction of movement is not related to any vectorial component of the stimulus. Now, nastic responses may involve differential growth, in which the case the movement is permanent. Now, examples of nastic movements involve epinasty and thermonasty. Now, these are examples of nastic movements or nastic responses involving differential growth. Now, what is epinasty anyway? Now, when we speak of epinasty, this is the downward bending of a plant organ, commonly among petioles and leaves whose tips are inclined towards the ground. Now, this is not a response to gravity, however, but appears to depend on the unequal flow of auxin through the upper and lower sides of the plant organ. Now, everybody kindly take a look at this photo of two plants in which the plant on the left side is of normal growth and the plant on the right side is undergoing epinasty. So you will notice that there is a downward movement of the leaves. Now, another example of nastic movements in plants is thermonasty. Now, what is thermonasty? Now, thermonasty is the repeated opening and closure of some petals such as tulips and crocuses. So, in thermonasty, this is plant movement that is caused by temperature stimulus. Again, like for example, we have tulip flowers that bloom if the temperature rises. Now, in the case of tulips, if the temperature rises, the flowers bloom. And if the temperature drops, the flowers close. Now, this is also true for crocuses. Now, as temperatures drop, the outer surfaces of the petals of crocuses, they grow rapidly, causing the petals to bow inwards. And rising temperatures cause rapid growth of the inner surfaces of the petals of crocuses, bowing them outward. So those are examples of plants that exhibit thermonasty. Now, another type of plant movement is known as nyctinastic movements. Now, nyctinastic movement in plants, that is from the Greek word nyktos meaning night and nastos meaning closure, are the most evident in leaves that take up a different position in the night from that taken during the day. Now, typically leaves or leaflets are in the horizontal position or open position during the day, and they assume a more vertical or closed orientation at night. And these are examples of plants that exhibit nyctinastic movements. So the primary leaf of common bean plants exhibits particularly strong nictinastic movements. And also a good example of a plant that exhibits this kind of movement is the coleus or the so-called prayer plant. Now here is a time-lapse photo of the coleus or the prayer plant. So you will notice in this time-lapse photo that during daytime, the leaves they assume a horizontal or open position. But at night, you will observe that the leaves they are in a vertical or closed position. Now, how is this possible anyway? Now, nictinastic movements like this exhibited by the coleus or the prayer plant is due to ion fluxes and resulting osmotic responses in specialized motor cells. Now let's go deeper into this explanation. Now during closure of the leaves of the coleus or the prayer plant, the motor cells of the extensor region of the petiole lose turgor pressure, while the motor cells of the flexor region of the petiole gain turgor pressure. So the petiole moves towards the stem axis. Then during the opening of the leaves of the coleus or the prayer plant, the extensor cells they gain turgor pressure and the flexor cells of the petiole lose turgor pressure, thus driving the petiole away from the stem axis. Now another example of nastic plant movement is known as seismonasty. Now what is seismonasty anyway? Now seismonasty in plants is the response to mechanical stimulation. And do you know what the best example of a seismonastic plant is? The tropical shrub Mimosa pudica, also known as the Macahiya plant. Now for the Macahiya plant, this survival advantage of such a response is not certain. Now since these plants like the Macahiya plant grow in arid areas where they are exposed to drying winds, folding the leaves may be a means of reducing water loss. And you know what? Even during my childhood days, I am really fascinated about the response of Mimosa pudica or Macahiya plant to touch. So everybody look at this photo of the Macahiya plant in response to touch. So very quickly the leaves they close. So isn't that fascinating indeed? Now how do we explain this quick and sudden movement of the Mimosa pudica or the Macahiya plant? Now it has something to do with specialized cells. Now this movement of Mimosa pudica involves the movement of pulvini motor cells. Now when touched, this triggers sensory cells on the inside of the leaf, sending electrical signals from cell to cell. And the pulvini cells gain and they lose turgor pressure due to water moving in and out of these cells. And multiple ion concentrations, they also play a role in the manipulation of water movement. So that's how we explain this quick and sudden response of Mimosa pudica or the Macahiya plant. So isn't that fascinating indeed? Now another example of a plant that exhibits seismonasty aside from Mimosa pudica is the so-called Venus flytrap. So here is a video clip of the movement of the Venus flytrap. So the explanation of this is pretty much the same as Mimosa pudica. So once an animal gets inside the Venus flytrap, the Venus flytrap responds quickly by closing its leaves. So isn't that fascinating indeed? Again, the explanation of this opening and closure is pretty much the same as Mimosa pudica. And lastly, another type of nastic plant movement is known as stigmotrophism. Now, what is stigmotrophism anyway? Now, stigmotrophism occurs most often when plants grow around a surface like a wall, pot, or trellis. Climbing plants such as vines develop tendrils that coil around the supporting objects. And did you know that auxin also plays an important role in stigmotrophism? Now, touch cells produce auxin and transport it to untouched cells. Now, some untouched cells will then become longer, faster, then eventually cell growth bends around the object. So, before we end this online lecture about trophism, let's watch this video about nastic movement in plants. Alright, so let's watch this.
Earlier in this series, when we learned about plant growth, we mentioned a plant hormone called auxin, which allows plants to possess a sense of direction. Auxin, along with several other chemicals found in plants, is responsible for plant tropisms, which means movement or growth towards or away from a stimulus. A positive tropism is growth or movement towards a stimulus, and a negative tropism is growth or movement away from a stimulus. The stimuli that plants react to can include light, gravity, water, touch, chemicals, and temperature. Each of these stimuli has its own tropism, and plants can grow with positive or negative tropisms in relation to each of these stimuli. So let's go through them one at a time now. Phototropism is growth in relation to the presence of light. Since plants need light in order to photosynthesize, it's important that they grow away from shaded areas. When light receptors in a plant's cells sense light in a certain direction, they trigger the hormone auxin to elongate the cells on the dark side of the plant, such that it bends towards the light. You may have noticed sunflowers and some other plants demonstrating a special kind of phototropism called heliotropism, where the flower head or some other part of the plant pivots to remain facing the sun as it moves across the sky every day. When we first discussed auxin, we also mentioned gravitropism, also known as geotropism, which is plant growth related to gravity. This is important when plants are first emerging from their seeds. Positive gravitropism helps the roots grow downward towards the pull of gravity, while negative gravitropism helps the stem grow upward against the pull of gravity. Hydrotropism is growth in relation to concentrations of water. Positive hydrotropism causes plant roots to grow towards saturated soil in order to collect water for the plant. But there is also such a thing as having too much water. Plant roots can actually drown in oversaturated soil, so negative hydrotropism causes roots to grow into drier soils. When parts of a plant encounter a solid object, they demonstrate thigmotropism, or growth in response to physical touch. Positive thigmotropism can be seen when a climbing vine wraps itself around a solid object as it grows. Negative thigmotropism is exhibited by roots growing away from or around rocks in the soil. We are probably getting the basic idea of how tropisms work. Chemotropism is growth in relation to concentrations of certain chemicals. Thermotropism is growth in response to temperature. Each of these tropisms we mentioned is important in maximizing the survival and therefore reproductive success of a plant. Let's now return to the idea of phototropism for a moment. Plants are able to sense the presence and direction of light, but also the amount of light, the angle of the light, and the amount of time each day that light is present. All of this is very important for helping to determine the circadian rhythms and phenology of the plant, which are words that refer to responses towards the day-night cycle on Earth, as well as other cyclic or seasonal phenomena. Plant circadian rhythms determine when buds open into flowers, when flowers close for the night, and other day-night cycles of plant behavior. These rhythms are achieved primarily using the light sensors in plant cells, as well as the cycles of hormone concentrations within a plant. While circadian rhythms are the day-night cycles of plants, phenology is how scientists describe the seasonal or yearly cycles of plants. Most plants do their growing during the warm, wet months of the year, and then either become dormant or die during the dry, cool months. But plant phenology can get much more complicated than that. The first wildflowers of the year begin to grow and bloom when the angle of the sun rises above a certain point, signaling that spring is on its way. Similarly, trees lose their leaves in autumn when they sense shortening photoperiods, or the amount of time with sunlight each day. Changes like leafing out and flowers blooming are important for a plant's life cycle, but also for the other living things that might rely on that plant for food or other resources. While we and other animals like us might view plants as sources of food, our consumption of plants directly harms their physical bodies. We did mention that some plants benefit from animals eating their fruits or nuts in order to transport their seeds to new growing locations, but for the most part, herbivory, which is when animals eat plants, is bad for plants. However, plants have been participating in the evolutionary arms race against herbivory for a long time, and they have evolved some clever ways to protect themselves from herbivores. Plant defenses come in two main types: physical defenses and chemical defenses. Physical plant defenses are things that would physically deter an herbivore from eating a plant. Some examples of physical plant defenses are spines or thorns, like on honey locust trees or cacti. Plants can also have a tough outer coating, such as bark or a waxy substance that prevents herbivores from being able to bite through a plant's tissues. When plants are working to deter insect herbivores, they can enact much smaller physical defenses too. Many leaves have tiny hairs on them that feel soft to our hands, but work like giant thorns against insect bodies. Some plants also have high silica content in their leaves. Chewing on leaves full of silica grinds down the mouth parts of insects and prevents them from eating effectively, or may even cause them to starve to death. Plant chemical defenses can range from chemicals that make a plant smell or taste bad to an herbivore, all the way up to extremely deadly poisons. There are also plants with topical chemical defenses like poison ivy and wild parsnip. If an animal gets the oils from these plants on their exposed skin, it can wind up with an itchy rash or even chemical burns. And again, plants have a special set of chemical defenses for dealing with insects. On top of taste deterrents and toxins, some plants also produce chemical compounds that mimic insect growth hormones. If an insect consumes too much of these hormone mimics, it can be prevented from changing to its next life stage or reproducing. And with that, we've learned a bit about the behavior of plants, including the ways they interact with physical stimuli and other living organisms. Combining this with previous information on plant structure, plant growth, and plant classification, that leaves us with a reasonable understanding of the incredible world of plants.
Alright, well I guess that's about it for our online lecture about plant movement or plant tropism. I hope you have learned a lot about this online lecture. So again, please like and share this online lecture so that we can inspire more students, especially those taking life sciences. So I guess this is it. This is your life science professor, Professor June Cajigal, saying, live long and prosper. So I will see you in our next video.